everyone.
Morning.
Rivers do not drink their own water. Trees do not eat their own fruit. The sun does not shine on itself, and flowers do not spread their fragrance for themselves. Living for others is a rule of nature. We're all born to help each other, no matter how difficult it is. Life is good when you are happy, but it's even better when others are happy because of you. That's a quote this week from Pope Francis. I welcome you to our Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist Zoom service. I am happy to see so many of you, and I was especially happy during Inter-Rejoice and Come In to see our beautiful fellowship that I'm missing, and I know the rest of you are as well. I welcome Ted Rulseh today. I'm always happy when Ted comes to speak to us from the Northern Woods, and we miss him as well. He was a former member, as most of you know. His topic today, Lake Science, the Coloring Book. I bet each of you can think of a lake that you love, that you sit near, that you look out at, that you're inspired by. And Ted is going to help us to understand what makes a lake tick. The physical, the chemical, the biological processes that drive that ecosystem. So we are thrilled to have you with us, Ted. Thank you so much. We are a lay-led congregation, as all of you know. We do count on our principles. We hold them close to our hearts. We covenant to hold an open mind and an open heart. I want to read our recently endorsed principle, just to have it uppermost on our minds. We affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. So we welcome everyone. Do we have any announcements today? If so, feel free to press your spacebar.
This Wednesday, we'll be having a Woke Men's Breakfast Zoom and working with Jim on getting that set up, and I'll send the emails out so you'll be able to connect at 9 o'clock on Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
This is Pat. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, this is Patty. And I want to let everybody know that the building Unity, get out the vote, mobile will be moved to the city parking lot across from the library today at 11 this morning. And it will be staffed tonight from 4 until 8. And I'm just encouraging everybody to come down and see it. And if you want a little refresher or haven't had any training and you're interested in volunteering, there are some slots open yet. You could sign up there, but you could also talk then to the people who are tabling, and they could give you a little review of what we are doing if we have any people asking for information on registering to vote and voting early. So hope to see you there. The bus will be there it will be leaving Thursday morning sometime. Thanks.
Thank you, Patty.
This is Jim. I want to just put out a thank you to the music committee, which is Linda, Kathy, Ginny, and Kim. They're the ones that are responsible for putting together the music for the and branding it with pictures of our fellowship. And I really thank you for the work you put into that. So nice job, folks.
Amen. Any other announcements today?
Just like to say, appreciate your thank you, Jim, but Kim is the one who really stepped up. She was really responsible for getting us in a format that we could all use. So thanks so much, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. And if there's no more announcements, we will go on to our chalice lighting. We light this flame as a symbol of the new life enlightening our way, as the symbol of the warmth in every human heart.
Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to share strength in fellowship, thus do we covenant.
Our opening words today are "We Bid You Welcome" by Richard S. Gilbert.
We bid you welcome, who come with weary spirit, seeking rest.
Who come with troubles that are too much with you, who come hurt and afraid.
We bid you welcome, who come with hope in your heart.
Who come with anticipation in your step, who come proud and joyous.
We bid you welcome, who are seekers of a new faith.
Who come to probe and explore, who come to learn.
We bid you welcome, who enter this hall as a homecoming.
Who have found room for your spirit, who find in this people a family.
Whoever you are, whatever you are, wherever you are on your journey.
We bid you welcome. At this time, I would like to turn the floor over to Ted. Excuse me. He's going to start with a reading by Aldo Leopold from the Sand County Almanac, and then he will go into his presentation on lake science.
Thanks, Mary Jo, and thanks to all of you for having me. It's always good to be back at Lakeshore UU, even if virtually. My own fellowship here in the Northwoods is also doing services by Zoom, which probably most churches and fellowships are these days. So this reading is from The Land Ethic by Aldo Leopold. And I guess you have to maybe excuse the sexist language. It was an artifact of the times. But he writes, all ethics so far evolved rest upon a single premise, that the individual is a member of a community of interdependent parts. His instincts prompt him to compete for his place in the community, but his ethics prompt him also to cooperate, perhaps in order that there may be a place to compete for. The land ethic simply enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soils, waters, plants, and animals, or collectively the land. In short, the land ethic changes the role of Homo sapiens from conqueror of the land community to plain member and citizen of it. It implies respect for his fellow members and also respect for the community as such. So I guess now I have to share my screen here. And this little slide presentation I put together, and I give talks to lake associations around Wisconsin and elsewhere. It's an introduction to what makes a lake tick and I did this because we are more or less loving our lakes to death. We are putting so much pressure on them that we're causing their slow deterioration. And there's a saying from Jane Goodall. She says, only if we understand can we care. Only if we care will we help. Only if we help shall we be saved. And so this presentation is toward taking that first step of understanding what a lake actually is. It's not just a place to swim upon or boat upon or fish in or observe from our pier. There's an awful lot going on around, over, and under that water. So one of the ways to characterize lakes is by how they get their water. There are three basic, well, we'll say for this purposes, three basic types of lakes. You can dice that down further if you want to. But a drainage lake is a lake that has a creek coming in and a creek going out. That's the kind of lake that we live on here. It's a drainage lake. A lake like this is, the level of it is pretty much self-regulating. If you have a drought, there will, or a wet period, there'll still be, the lake water will still be at the same level, because you can imagine it's like putting a hose in a bucket. The water comes in, the water goes out, and the level pretty much stays the same. Another type of lake is a seepage lake. This is a lake that gets most of its water from rain. It's intimately connected with the groundwater, as you can see represented here. And this kind of lake in a drought will see a significant drop in the water level because a dry period tends to lower the water table. A seepage lake is essentially a place in the landscape where the landscape intersects the water table. Another type of lake is a perched lake. This is not really very common, but this lake basically sits up above the groundwater. It's kind of like a bowl. It's got an impermeable bottom, and a lake like this in a time of drought will, again, see a significant decline in water level. Another way to classify lakes is by way of their trophic status, or the amount of nutrients in the water. The first kind of lake here is an oligotrophic lake, and that means few nutrients. These lakes tend to be rocky, deep, and very clear, with very few weeds and very little algae growth. And I'm going to click ahead. On the other end of that spectrum is a eutrophic lake, which is very rich in nutrients and will tend to be very weedy, full of lots of algae, and subject to seasonal algae blooms, which turn the water kind of a pea soupy green. And then in the middle, kind of like Baby Bear, just right. It's got a moderate level of nutrients and algae and plant growth, and that's the kind of lake that we live on. I think most of our lakes here in northern Wisconsin are of this type. Okay, thermal stratification. A lake in this area of the earth generally will have layers during the different seasons. In the as the lake ice goes off and the water starts to warm up, the lake stratifies. The warm water is less dense, of course, than colder water. So as the summer goes on, you get the warm water floating, warm lighter water floating on top, and the cold heavier water on the bottom, and in between a transition zone that we call the thermocline. Now you can experience the thermocline if you're out swimming in about 15, 20 feet of water, and you do one of these feet first surface dives. You'll go down and down and down, and your feet will feel warm, 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 and then all of a sudden cold. And that means your feet have punched through the thermocline into that dark, cold layer down below. All right, and what's going on in that upper layer that's constantly getting stirred by wind and wave action, so that is very rich in oxygen, that upper layer. Then along comes fall, and the wind and wave actions tends to stir all that water up. The surface water warms, and pretty soon all the water can mix again. We call this the fall turnover. And what happens here is now the lake is pretty much uniform in temperature all throughout. And as a consequence of that, the lake is very much infused with oxygen from top to bottom. It's kind of as if your lake took a long, deep cleansing breath to prepare it for winter. And that becomes very important as the winter goes on, because the creatures living in that lake under that ice need oxygen to make it through the winter. In the winter, we have a different kind of stratification, a different temperature profile. Interesting thing about water, most substances when they freeze, or when their temperature declines and they freeze, their density, they keep becoming more and more dense. What happens with water is that when it hits about 39 degrees, it starts to become less dense again, and until it becomes ice, which expands further and is even less dense than that. So we have the ice forming on top of the lake. It's interesting what would happen if water weren't this way. If the ice were heavier than the liquid water, the ice would sink to the bottom of the lake and continue to accumulate down there until, through a cold winter, the lake would probably freeze into a solid block, and it would never probably melt completely after that. So it's very fortunate, this characteristic of water. So in the winter time, we have the ice and the very surface water at 32 degrees F or 0 degrees C, which is the freezing temperature. And then down in the bottom of the lake, we have the relatively warmer water at about 39 degrees F or 4 degrees C. Then again, in the springtime, we have what's called the spring turnover. The ice melts, and the water once again becomes uniform in temperature, and the wind and wave action stirs it all up. And again, the lake is nicely charged with oxygen. All right, scientists like to split things up into zones. Lakes have 4 basic zones that we refer to. The first one is the littoral zone. And this zone extends out from the shoreline to the point where the sunlight can no longer penetrate deep enough to support rooted plants. And so the littoral zone is where most of the action is in the lake. This is where most of the creatures and the fish hang out. This is really the most living, most vibrant, most diverse part of a lake. Then out in the middle, we have the limnetic zone. And this is way out in the open water where it's too deep for plants to grow. And we see algae growing, again, to about the depth where sunlight can penetrate, because the algae aren't going to live where they can't get any sunlight. Then down below that, we have the profundal zone. And this is more or less the area that I showed you before that's below the thermocline. And it's very cold, very dark, and nutrient poor down there. And as the algae and other living materials die and sink down to the bottom, they fall into that profundal zone where they decompose and consume the oxygen. So this area of the lake becomes very oxygen poor. And then on the bottom itself, the bottom sediment is called the benthic zone. And this is where we see clams, we see crayfish, other kinds of creatures. The mayflies and the midges, which are very important parts of the lake food chain, are developing as larval forms in this benthic zone, not way down in that bottom area, but up in the shallower water where there's more oxygen. And so this is a really important part of the lake. It's not just this mucky, gravelly substance that we see down there. It's very important to lake life. Okay, we have various kinds of plants that exist in our lakes. We tend to call plants that grow in the water weeds. I sort of wish we would call them aquatic plants, because weed has a negative connotation. And these plants have a lot of benefits. All these types of plants, they're refuges for little fish against big fish. They're places where aquatic insects develop and grow. They provide cooling shade. They protect the shoreline against erosion. They help infuse the lake with oxygen through their photosynthesis. So they're really important. They can grow, weeds can grow to nuisance proportions so that they interfere with our swimming, our boating, our fishing. But in the main, they are very beneficial and necessary to the ecosystem. This type of plant is called emergent plants. They're rooted in the bottom, but they stick up above the water. And we see an actual picture, an example of emergent plants. That's a form of bulrushes. That's one of the types of emergent plants. And here's another type of emergence. This is actually called pickerel weed. It's got kind of arrowhead-shaped leaves and pretty purple flowers. We have some of that on our lake. We have those bulrushes right along our shoreline. All right, then we have floating leaf plants. And one of those types of floating leaf plants is, of course, the water lily. There's also another, let's see if I have a, yeah. There's another type of floating leaf plant that's similar to the water lily, only it has this yellow flower on a stalk. Looks kind of like a lollipop. This type of floating leaf plant is called spatterdock. And then we have, of course, the submerged plants, and there are many, many types of these. These are the pondweeds, the cabbage weeds, the coontail. And again, these are really important for fish life. This is where the young fish, newly hatched fish, are hanging out, and of course the little fish attract the predator fish. So fishermen like me, we come to appreciate these submerged plants. Okay, what's the source of lake life? I always ask this question when I give these presentations. The source of lake life really is the sun. It's the sun that provides the energy that enables the tiny microscopic algae to create food. The little algae are what we call the primary producers. They are the ones that generate the food that's going to drive the whole food web. So the sun helps the algae grow, and the algae feed the tiny little plankton creatures that I'm going to show you later. And then the little fish eat the plankton, the bigger fish eat the little fish. So the walleye that you put on your dinner table that you caught in the lake owes its existence to the sun. I like to think of a lake as a thin soup. It's not just a bowl of water out there. It's actually a soup. The broth is the nutrient-rich water, and the little plankton floating in the water, the algae, are the vegetables in the soup. And there's a picture of some algae. They're actually microscopic. And then the meat in the soup are these little creatures that we call zooplankton. So this little fella here is called a copepod. These little guys swim around in the water, and they're not microscopic. They're about maybe a millimeter or a little bit more in size. They swim around in the water and get gobbled up by little fish in the fry form. This little creature here is called a daphnia. The common name for this is a water flea. These are actually probably the most dominant form of zooplankton in a lake. They're extremely important to the food chain. You wouldn't think that a little guy like this would be so important, but this is what, again, all the little fry are feeding on. And this is after the algae, this is kind of the base of the food web. If you lose your daphnia population, your fish population is going to be in jeopardy. And then we have another type of zooplankton. This little thing here is called a rotifer. And they're, again, these are not microscopic, but these are about maybe half a millimeter in size. And they're called rotifers. The root word, I guess, would be rotation. At the mouth, on the right side of this creature, as you're looking at the screen, is a structure called a corona. And there's little growths on there called cilia that make a circular motion. It's not actually a wheel spinning, but it does look that way. And what this does is create a current that pulls food into the little stomach. So those are the main types of zooplankton. So we talked about how we're loving our lakes to death. There are things that, really people ask me, what's the biggest threat to our lake? And I think I say in a nutshell, well, we are human beings. We're all building homes. I include myself in this. We build our homes. We have our boats. We cut the trees on our property to build our houses. And we put in septic systems, and all these things create stresses on the lake. The septic systems, to one degree or another, and over time are going to contribute nutrients to the lake, which is not a good thing. Maybe we use fertilizer or pesticides on our lawn. I don't have a lawn, and I don't use fertilizers or pesticides, but that's another thing that that can be detrimental to a lake. So things you can do, plant a shoreline buffer instead of having grass clear down to the lake. If you're going to have a lawn at all, you should have a buffer strip, maybe 20, 30, 40 feet wide, coming up from the water, that's made out of native plants, so that the water that's running off your property gets stopped by these plants and taken up by them, so that the nutrients in that water are not going into the lake, but they're being taken up by the plants. It's necessary to maintain our septic systems properly, make sure they're serviced, pumped regularly, and inspected. We should avoid using fertilizers or pesticides to the extent we can. Pick up pet waste. Put that doggy doo in the garbage. Don't let the nutrients from that wash into the water. And just in general, keep runoff away from the lake. Lake water quality protection starts on the land, and what we should be doing is trying to make sure that the water that falls on the land from the rain or the snow stays on the land, because otherwise it's washing nutrients into the lake, and ultimately that's going to add to the growth of nutrients. Okay, I had a little subliminal cut there of my book. This isn't a commercial, but I do have a book called A Lakeside Companion that covers a lot of these concepts in more detail. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions. We got a few minutes set aside for that.
Ed, this is Barry. Tell us the name of your lake and where it's located, please.
Oh, our lake is about 15 miles southeast of Minocqua. It's called Birch Lake. I think there's probably about 20 Birch Lakes in Wisconsin. So if I tell people I live on Birch Lake, that could locate me just about anywhere. But yeah, we are about 15 miles southeast of Minocqua in Oneida County.
Ted, do you want to stop the screen share?
Okay. All right.
I have a question, kind of. Badger Lake, have you heard of it? There's a campground near it. It's one of those gravelly ones.
Did you say Badger Lake?
Yeah, I think it's Badger Lake. I only went there when I was younger, so.
Okay, well, I haven't heard of it, but there's a lot of lakes in Wisconsin I'm sure I haven't heard of.
Yeah, it's one of those gravel ones. And I was wondering, like, I don't remember exactly what you said, but I remember once there's a lot of algae there. So it somehow grew. And I was just wondering, like, how is that different to, like, not gravelly lake, I guess.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand your question. You're saying this lake has a lot of algae in it?
We went there once when it, excuse me. We went there once when it was blooming. Like there was a lot of little algae specks all everywhere.
Okay.
And it was all gravelly, and it was just like, it was one of those lakes where it's pretty clear, except for that one time. And I was wondering what's the difference between that lake algae bloom and like this, the more sandy lake algae bloom, I guess.
I'd say it doesn't really have to do with what the bottom is like. It just has more to do with how the lake was formed and the landscape that it's over and where it's getting its water from. If you have an algae bloom, that's probably a mesotrophic lake in some stage or a eutrophic lake. It's got to have enough nutrients in it to drive that prolific algae growth. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering what the difference, if there was a difference. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there some plants, or can you recommend plants that would be more beneficial to plant between along your property, between the lake and where the lawn or the shore begins?
I'm not really an expert in that area. There are landscape companies that you can go to that can advise on types of native plants. It doesn't really have to be native plants to form a shoreline buffer. Any kind of planting that tends to stop and take up the water before it gets to the lake. One of the easiest ways to have a buffer strip, if you already have a lawn, is what's called no mow. You just stop mowing the lawn for the last 30 or 40 feet down toward the lake, and the grass will come up, and that will generally contain enough of a seed bank that a lot of natural plants will sprout. But there are actually businesses that specialize in native plantings for along lake shores and anywhere else. And so they can be a good source of advice. Unfortunately, there are not that many of them. That's kind of a specialized area that's just sort of now coming into vogue.
Ted, this is Jim. I learned when I was over at the Maritime Museum in one of their fish exhibits, what's happening with plastic. Plastic doesn't deteriorate. It goes down to small little, almost plankton size bits, and it stays in the water. Can you speak to how plastic pollution can affect the ecosystem of a lake?
Yeah, again, I'm more of a specialist in inland lakes. We don't see that much of a problem in the inland lakes with that, but that is a serious problem, and big plastics and tiny plastics alike can be a problem. We've all seen pictures of fish trapped in a 6-pack plastic holder, or horror stories like that. Another form of plastic pollution is what's called these microbeads that are used in a lot of shampoos and lotions and so forth. And these have become a pretty significant problem. A lot of companies have taken them out of their products now. But yeah, I don't know a whole lot more about it than that, but it is a serious problem, especially in the Great Lakes and the oceans.
Yeah, this is Erica. You might want to check the chat. Jeanette has had a couple of questions in there.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Okay, are there any incentives to help people build that buffer? Good question. There are a few counties and a few lake groups who do have incentives in terms of property tax breaks or outright payments for building buffers. The state of Wisconsin also has something called the Healthy Lakes Initiative, where any homeowner can apply for a grant of up to $1,000 to install any of 5 different best practices. And one of those is a rain garden, and another of those is a buffer strip. You can actually get money from the state in order to do that. And I guess I wish there was more of it. I forget what the actual number is, but I think under the Healthy Lakes program, there have been so far maybe 600 and some of these best.
Sounds like perhaps Ted was frozen there for a minute. Back.
While we're waiting,
Mhm.
when Ted was talking about the grants that will help people, with their plantings and with their efforts, the Lakeshore Natural Resource Partnership, who Robert and I worked with, I was on the board of, and so we became familiar with the processes. Anyway, there's about 12, 15 groups under that they umbrella for, and there's specific lakes, you know, like, you know, in Cleveland, areas in Cleveland, and Silver Lake here in Manitowoc. You've seen the signs that says, "We all live on the water." So there's grants and monies available to not just corporations and institutions, but individuals who are working their land as you know, part of "We all live on the water." So yeah, so and working with agriculture as well. So just as a resource for people, it's LNRP, Lakeshore Natural Resource Partnership.
That's excellent, Benita. Thank you. It looks like we have Ted back. You may need to unmute yourself, Ted. I know Jeanette had another question that she had mentioned. There we go. We heard a lot about zebra mussels in the past and wondering if that is still a concern. We'll see if we can get Ted to mention that one. Hi, Ted, you're back.
Yeah, zebra mussels are a problem. Yeah, I'm back. My internet kicked me out for some reason. I don't know why. I have 2 different networks that I can use. My Frontier internet can be unreliable. I have a satellite internet as a backup. So anyway, yeah, the zebra mussels are still a problem, and even worse are the quagga mussels. Zebra mussels tend to need to grab onto a rock or a pipe or some kind of structure in the water, but quagga mussels will grow like a carpet on the bottom. And they're filter feeders. They're constantly sucking in water and pulling the nutrients out, which is why Lake Michigan's water is so incredibly clear now. We tend to think that's a good thing to have nice clear water, but in that case, it's not a sign of a healthy lake at all. It's a sign of a lake that's impaired. The nutrients are being pulled out of the lake, and so there's not enough food to drive a healthy food web, and that has its impacts on the fish population.
Ted, our Herald Times reporter is very much diminished by the lack of your column. We all miss you very much, and we miss your wife's column. Pass that on to her. Do you and Noel do any writing for the newspapers up there?
Yeah, well, thank you for the comment on Noel's column. It was kind of a shame the way that was done. It was one of these corporate decisions where, well, you're not getting enough clicks, so we're going to cut you off. And instead of saying another month or so, it was like, all right, well, this column will be your last. Goodbye. So that's corporate world these days. But she, in a way, misses doing the column, and in a way doesn't. It's a weekly responsibility she doesn't have anymore. I write a column called "The Lake Where You Live" for two newspapers here in Rhinelander and Minocqua, and it's a lake science column, observations about lake life. Much of the material that I covered in my talk was in that column. And I also, when I get a bee in my bonnet, I write a letter to the editor, to the local paper. And I'm also working on another book about lakes. I should know this.
We were wondering if you were perhaps working on
the greatest places on earth. Yeah, it's called the greatest places on earth are lakes and how we're loving them to death. And it's under contract with University of Wisconsin Press.
Excellent. Proud of you for that, Ted. And that phrase, loving our lakes to death, that is a powerful phrase and cause for stop and concern.
I have a question.
Yeah, you know,
hello. I have a question probably for Ted and maybe for Benita too. I walk the dog sometimes down by the lake, and I've noticed that they're spraying pesticides. The city is spraying pesticides on the grass down there. And I wondered, can you tell me what kinds of strategies can we use to convince our governments not to do this?
Oh boy, that's tough. I think it just takes. There's a lake biologist from Minnesota who has some really interesting thoughts on this subject. It's not something that there's a magic pill for, but he likens it to playing the long game of education to change the social norm. There's when it comes to people mowing lawns all the way down to their lake, or using fertilizers and pesticides to have the suburban lawn, there's a social norm that has to change. And he kind of likens it to what it took to change the culture around driving while intoxicated. Look at how long it took for that social norm to change. From when it was just no big deal, everybody went out to the bars and got smashed and drove home drunk, and nobody thought that much about it, and the penalties were not that severe. Until now, it's you get caught with a DWI, and that's a stigma. You are not looked on kindly for having done that. And what it took was not top-down government intervention, but citizen grassroots action. And I think we have pretty much the same situation here when it comes to trying to take care of our lakes. We all have this private property ethic where, well, I bought this property, I get to do whatever I want with it. And in reality, we are all, if we're on a lake, we're part of a community, and we have to think of the community and the lake itself when we do things with our properties. And that's the social norm that has to change, and it's going to take some time. A lot of really good work is being done in that area, but the progress is glacially slow.
This is our own, probably the city government that's spreading this stuff down by the lake. It's on, yeah, maybe Benita has some suggestions.
Well, actually, we've had activism with the city, meeting with the city right here in our UU community through our Globe committee. Judy Northern spearheaded, along with Bernard, our own Bernard Nelson. Bernard worked professionally in California and in Madison on these specific issues. And so Bernard is really, as a member of our UUs, he is someone to tap, perhaps to give a talk. Also, Sandy Bass and I put out an article, Climate Conversations with our UU community, that Kim had in the last newsletter. And then Kim is working on continuing conversation with plastic and partnering with someone. Perhaps our third installment of our continuing conversations would be good to ask Bernard to contribute, because he is a knowledgeable resource right in our midst. Thank you.
Thank you.
Erica, where exactly are they spraying the pesticides? Where, like
all
the
along,
waysides, or
all along the bike path. Yeah.
Okay.
It's city property.
Right.
So, I mean, I can't believe they're doing it. I mean, at the very least, they should be thinking about the dogs that go around there and walk around there, because dogs absorb that through their feet, and everybody's walking their dog there. So, but they aren't thinking about the runoff. It's right there by the lake. It's going to wash directly into the lake every time it rains.
Yeah, citizen activism is I would say the solution. Put enough pressure on, and maybe things get looked at.
Yeah, we literally walked along with the city officials and pointed out these facts, and Bernard was full of facts, and not much come from that, but they got information from us in regards to that, and push and concern. So it needs a little bit more effort, I think. Continue.
Whether there are any statutes, like state or federal statutes around this that they are disobeying. Can we point to anything like that?
This is Ginny. I have a question
Yeah,
related to this, Erica. I don't know that it makes much difference in terms of poisoning the lake, but are they spraying pesticides or are they spraying for weeds, to kill the weeds?
It says pesticides on the sign.
Okay, I was thinking if they're killing the weeds, that's maybe even worse.
It looks like they're also killing the weeds, because after they've done this, the dandelions are all dying.
You know, it's Jim and I have actually started a clover lawn, and if they want green, there are alternatives. And our clover lawn in our backyard literally has no weeds. It's absolutely amazing. And the other thing that it would save money for the city, not only on the cost of the insecticide, you know, obviously the dangers to the environment, but cutting. I mean, a clover lawn only grows so fast and so far, and it stops growing. So, I mean, we've actually enjoyed watching our clover lawn, and it just attracts amazing wildlife too. So if anyone else is interested in converting their lawn.
do you have the clover that has the purple flowers in it?
We have a mixture of red and white clover on the lawn. My husband needs to stop cutting so we can see the clover flowers.
Yeah.
He's in the habit of cutting on a regular basis, but yeah, it's actually quite lovely. The bunnies love it, the bees love it. It's actually, and it spreads so fast. We're just amazed at how quickly it's grown. So next year we'll be doing our front lawn.
Yeah, it reseeds itself, you know, if you let it. Yeah.
And then apparently they used to mix clover with grass all the time, because clover replaces the nitrogen that the grass takes out of the ground.
Exactly. The grass. It's the grass that is still left in the backyard just looks amazing.
Yeah, so even if you have a grass yard, you can sow it over with clover, and you don't need to use any fertilizer or anything. It's just
exactly what we did. Yep, we just sowed it right into the lawn, and we had a lush green lawn last year, and so it was looking very well in spring, and we just sowed it right over. We did aerate first, and it's just been amazing.
Is that all you need to do, is just aerate and then throw the seeds out there, or how does it work?
Well, technically you don't even need to aerate, but our lawn was pretty thick, so we did aerate, and then just sow it right in, and we added absolutely no fertilizer. And it's softer too. Maggie just loves it. She just sits out in the yard as much as she can now. It's really quite nice.
Kim, I think I heard you say they just sew it right in. So what I'm asking
No, Jim, he used a lawn spreader and just sewed it right into the lawn.
Thank you.
Very easy, no big deal.
Well, we're going to say thank you once again to Ted. We enjoyed your presentation so much. Obviously, it created a lot of chatter. So thank you, Ted, and love to your whole family. And we are going to go now to our closing song. And it's a familiar one that we have sang at the fellowship. Love will guide us.